and I'm so pleased.
Sorry, my things aren't going to work.
Oh, okay, sorry. Okay, turn it off.
I'm so pleased that so many people were able to carve out a little part of their Sunday afternoon to talk with us about this hugely important topic. And I'm so pleased to virtually see some of our local league members that I haven't seen in real life, IRL, the kids say, for so long. Bill and Martha, great to see you. Bunny, Edie, I'm so glad you're all here, truly. And my neighbor Renee, even though we're 3 doors from each other, we never see each other these days. So I'm really pleased that everybody could be here. We have a series of virtual events planned, so please pay attention to the newsletter if you're a league member, and to the Falls Church News Press, we'll be pushing out information about future events. I would like to ask if there's
I thought we could do it on your iPad, so I wouldn't have to use.
If there's people on the call who are not League of Women Voters Falls Church members, you are welcome. Would you just mind entering your name and email address in that chat box so that we can keep track of attendance at our events? It really does help us when we try to plan in case we need to increase bandwidth, Zoom subscriptions, mailing lists, whatever. Please just help us out by letting us know who you are. We would normally, if we were doing this in person, we would have a sign-in sheet, which obviously we don't have, and digital registration can be, it's possible, but it's a little bit cumbersome. So we just elected to provide everybody the Zoom link and ask people to self-identify if you're not a league member. But in any event, welcome to everybody. This session is to learn about the evolving situation with respect to voting in Virginia in the upcoming election. I think people are probably aware that the law changed on July 1st. A lot of us don't really understand the implications of that change and what might change between now and the election. And we have 2 people here who are supremely qualified to talk to us about that today. I'm going to introduce them very briefly and then turn it over to them. If you would like to ask a question, please ask it through the chat box, and we'll be taking questions at sort of the midpoint and then at the end of the session today. So Renee Andrews has been a member of the City of Falls Church Electoral Board since 2003. Prior to that, she served as the Chief Officer of Elections. She's a member of the Falls Church League of Women Voters, having served on programs nominating and voter service committees and the Falls Church City Democratic Committee. Renee is the past president and current treasurer of the 399-member Virginia Electoral Board Association. She served on the Virginia Department of Elections General Registrar and Electoral Board Workgroup studying General Registrar and Electoral Board duties and compensation levels from its inception in 2015 until 2020. In 2010, she was appointed as Virginia's local government representative on the National Standards Board of the Election Assistance Commission. She's also a member of the Metropolitan Washington Council of Government Election Officials Technical Committee. Until her retirement in 2014, Renee was a corporate financial analyst. Dave Bjerke has been Director of Elections and General Registrar of Voters for the City of Falls Church since August 2009. Before that, he was an election specialist in Fairfax County starting in 2007. Prior to his interest in elections, he worked as a drummer and manager of a local band. I love that. And to make ends meet, he was an administrative assistant for various companies around Northern Virginia. Dave is a member of the Voter Registrars Association of Virginia and serves on the VRAV Legislative Committee and chairs the Federal Government Liaison Committee. He's also a member of and former chair of the Metropolitan Washington Council of Government Election Officials Technical Committee. So welcome to you both. Thank you both for agreeing to spend some time with us this afternoon. And Renee, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you take it from here.
Well, we don't need the video.
Thanks very much, Wendy. It's really wonderful to be here. And I will preface by saying Wendy knew that the laws were changing July 1st, and she wanted us to present right after that earlier in July. And I kept saying, well, please wait, because the Department of Elections is not going to train us until the week of
Turn
July.
off
So
my,
could we at least wait
hotspot's
until
gonna-
after that time? And but it turns out that today is a perfect day because it's exactly 100 days until Election Day. So as I told somebody else who reminded me of that fact today, tomorrow we can start singing 99 bottles of beer. So I thank everybody. My screen showing 57 participants. That's absolutely wonderful. Let me see if I can share my screen here and see my presentation. That working? Good. Okay. So we hope that this will be an informative session on voting and election changes in Virginia this year. It is always a pleasure to work with the League of Women Voters, made even more pleasant today by collaborating with my colleague and good friend, Dave Bjerke. The only thing that would be better would be if we could do this safely in person, but that will remain a dream for next year. I would like to add that it is wonderful. I haven't seen everybody's 57 names, but I see that there are people from our office. We have some of our officers of election, some of our Democratic committee members, and some of my personal friends that I've told about this, all of whom are interested in elections and changes. So Wendy, thank you for opening the invitation to anybody that wanted to come. So let's talk about some of the changes that voters will see in November. Okay. So far, the General Assembly has passed 62 election-related bills. Wendy was talking about the new election law. Well, Wendy, there are actually 62 of them. I am not going to talk about all 62, but I will talk about several. And I say so far because the General Assembly has scheduled a special session on August 18th. The governor has called this session because they didn't have time to pass the budget earlier in the year. The governor also wants to consider criminal justice and police reform issues. So because of that full plate, it's unlikely that further election measures will be considered at the special session. Aside from that, anything that would be implemented immediately would be known as an emergency measure, and it would need to pass both houses with 80%. So my guess is we will not see more election legislation. We may see clarification from the Department of Elections because there still are several questions. Some of the topics that I would like to talk about are absentee and early voting, voter ID, and some other election topics. Afterwards, I think Dave is going to talk more in detail about vote by mail, and I'll let you in on a secret. This is one of his favorite subjects in the entire world. He will also talk about changes in our procedures necessitated by the COVID-19 pandemic. So Virginia now has no excuse absentee voting. And if you are going to vote what we used to call absentee in person, which is somewhat of an oxymoron because if you're absent, you're not really in person. But so we've changed the name of that to early voting. So if you vote in person, go to the registrar's office, that is now called early voting. There, you no longer have to fill out an application to do that. You just show up at the office, show your ID, and vote, very similarly to the way you would do it in a polling place. Early voting will begin on Friday, September 18th and continue through Saturday, October 31st. Our office is always open Monday through Friday from 8 until 5, and the 2 Saturdays before the election, those are October 24th and 31st. Say that 5 times fast. Saturday hours are 9 to 5. And our board will meet in the fall to decide if we add any additional hours. At this point, we have not done so. So that's in person. But really what we want you to do, and what you're hearing throughout a lot of news media, is vote by mail. If you want to minimize contact with other people, and I'm definitely one who wants to do that, because of the pandemic, we are recommending vote by mail. You can apply online for your ballot. You go to elections.virginia.gov, and at the top of that page is a message that says check or update your registration status and apply online for an absentee ballot, and it will call it the citizen portal. So you just click on the citizen portal, you input your information, and you can apply online for your absentee ballot. My husband and I have both done that about a week ago. I will add that occasionally you have to input your driver's license number. So have your driver's license with you when you go online to apply for your absentee ballot. Occasionally, I've heard personally of 2 cases so far. The system will not let you do it online. Every now and again, for some reason, your DMV signature has not transferred to the Department of Elections record. So if that's not available, then what you do is you download and print out the application, or you call our office and we will mail you an application. You fill it out, mail it in. Ballots will be mailed beginning September 18th. Ballots won't be ready until that time. There is a deadline, I think in mid-August, for referenda. So additional things could still be added to the ballot. So we won't be getting them approved until the beginning of September. We are required to have them ready to go by September 18th. So that's when you can expect, if you apply very early, you can expect it'll be mailed by September 18th. The deadline to apply by mail is October 23rd. You can vote up to October 31st in person, but we must receive your request for a ballot by mail by October 23rd. That deadline has been moved up. It used to be a week before the election. It's now 11 days before. We had that deadline moved up just because mail takes a long time. I did a test last year, mailing a couple of pieces of mail. I see Ellen Salisbury's here, and I think she mailed one from her house in the Broadway. I mailed one from my house on Park Avenue to City Hall, and it took 3 days to get from the 400 block of Park Avenue to the 300 block of Park Avenue, because it has to go through Merrifield and back. So just because of the mail, we've moved up the deadline to request the absentee ballot. But that's a deadline. Our office requests that you apply as early as possible, which is why I've already done so. That way we can process your application before we get really busy later in the fall. It will make our lives a whole lot easier. And another anecdote, 2 other people, not the 2 that couldn't do it online, but 2 who did get the online application up, thought that they must have been at the wrong website because they weren't asked, why do you want to vote absentee? And I assured them, nope, that question has been taken away from the application because you can vote absentee just because you feel like it. In addition, when you mail your ballot back, the new law provides that as long as the ballot is postmarked by Election Day, it will be counted if it is received by noon on the Friday following Election Day, which this year is November 6th. So you may have heard stories that say unless a contest is a blowout, we won't know election results on election night, and that is most definitely the case. Some states have even later deadlines for receipt of absentee ballots. I've looked up DC and Maryland, and DC's deadline is 1 week, so the following Tuesday. Maryland's deadline is 10 days after, so they're the Friday after us. Maryland doesn't, I don't think they even start to count any of their absentee ballots until after that time. And they're gonna have a lot of them. So there will be a lot of results that won't be known until well after the election. We've not been given our instructions. I'm assuming that we will be told to count everything received by election day on election night, and then we will have a later count that will get added. But we haven't been given instructions on that. A couple more facts about absentee voting. Technical changes were made to the emergency absentee voting procedures that we've had for some time. I bring up the subject, you don't need to know the technical changes, but not too many people are aware that Virginia does have emergency procedures in place. A voter who is ill or hospitalized may have someone else bring in their request for an absentee ballot and also their voted ballot anytime up until 2 o'clock on Monday, the day before the election. And if a voter learns after Saturday noon, so 3 days before the election, that they've got a business or family emergency, you know, your boss emails you Saturday afternoon and says, I need for you to be out of town on Tuesday and you're gonna have to leave Monday night to get there. Come into our office on Monday, you can vote between 8 a.m. and 2 o'clock on Monday. We also are starting a permanent absentee list. There has always been an annual absentee list. It used to be limited to voters who had a physical condition that wouldn't let them get to the polls. And so the first time they applied, they would have to have a doctor's certification. The doctor's certification has gone away. So in December of this year, anybody who wants to apply for what we call an annual absentee ballot may do so. And we will send you all ballots for which you qualify. And what do I mean by for which you qualify? In the case of a primary, Virginia is an open primary state. So any voter can vote in any primary. So you would need to state on that application which party's primary you're going to want to vote in. And in the case of this year, there were 2 of them. So you would be bound by that unless you changed your annual application. So you can apply for an annual absentee application in December of 2020. And in July 2021, that will become a permanent absentee list. So those voters will be permanently mailed the ballots for which they qualify. And they would then have to go and remove that if they don't want to continue. Wendy, are you seeing any questions on absentee voting, or should I continue?
We have a couple of questions, but not on absentee voting, so I think.
Okay, so in that case, why don't I continue, because if there are other topics, we may cover them. Okay. Next big topic is voter identification. Voter identification is no longer required to vote in Virginia. We will still request your ID, but we won't require it. So I'm hoping that everybody is applauding silently. I can't hear you, but hopefully you're all applauding that we don't have to show ID anymore. The list of acceptable IDs has been expanded. ID doesn't have to have a photo anymore. So if you don't have a driver's license, passport, or a work ID, you can bring a utility bill or another document that verifies your voting address. If you don't have an ID at all, then you will complete and sign an identity form similar to the affirmation of identity that we used to use prior to 2013. That states under penalty of felony that you are the person that you are representing to be. We haven't seen the final form yet. Dave is actually on the committee working on it. And what it used to require was just that you would write your name and print your name, or sign your name and print your name so that you were verifying that you were that person. And then you vote, not provisional, you just go and vote like everybody else. If a voter has no ID and doesn't sign the statement, then the voter will be offered a provisional ballot, same as the ID provisionals in the past, subject to either providing a copy of the ID or signing the form by noon on the third day after the election. Our recommended practice in Falls Church anyway is that you bring your driver's license. Our electronic poll books will scan the barcode on your license, and that will automatically bring up the correct voter record so that we don't have to go through what I like to say is the list of John Smiths to make sure that we are checking in John Q. Smith and not John R. Smith. Okay, next topic. A couple of miscellaneous laws I'd like to talk about. Another new law will provide for automatic voter registration, and this is done at the DMV. When you change your address or do another DMV transaction, your voter registration will automatically reflect those changes. We've always been doing this at the DMV, but it used to be that you had to check a box on your DMV form saying, make this change effective for my voter registration as well. On the new form, there is a box that says, I don't want this change to apply to my voter registration. So it's changed from an opt-in to an opt-out. By the way, talking about voter registration changes, the deadline for changes this year is October 12th, which is 3 weeks and 1 day before the election. Next topic is sample ballots. Both political parties and other civic groups print sample ballots to hand to voters outside polling places to encourage voters to vote in certain ways. We may not see a lot of that with the minimal contact this year, but the law has changed, so I'll tell you about it anyway. There used to be more limits on the colors of paper used to print sample ballots. Under the new law, you can print sample ballots on any color paper you want except white. The reason is official ballots are white, so a sample ballot should never be able to be confused with an official ballot. Election Day is now a state holiday. Commonwealth of Virginia and many localities used to observe Lee Jackson Day in January. But in what I'm calling a win-win move, the new law eliminates Lee Jackson Day and replaces it with Election Day in November. Now that's for the state. The City of Falls Church did not previously observe Lee Jackson Day, so we don't know yet exactly what the city is going to do. Are they going to eliminate another holiday to make Election Day a city holiday? Are they going to add another city holiday to the calendar? That has not been determined yet. So we don't know if city offices will be closed on Election Day. What we do anticipate is that state workers and other people may find fewer conflicts for voting, and also what we're always looking for serving as officers of election. There may also be reduced traffic on Election Day, and that will be good for everybody. While I'm on the topic of officers of election, I know several faces and names that I see out there do serve and have served as officers of election, and we thank you so much for that. We are always looking for more officers. If you would like more information on serving as an officer of election, I'm your man. Let me know. If you let anybody in the league know, they all know how to reach me. So they'll forward me your information. I will send you the job description and we'll take it from there. Finally, there's some new laws involving recounts. You may remember there have been some high-profile recounts in Virginia in the last couple of years. The first law says only ballots counted in the original election will be subject to a recount. On Election Day, it is the job of officers of election to determine voter intent if a ballot can't be read by a machine. You've seen the examples of there's a box here and a box here, and somebody writes a check mark that is clearly in the lower box, but that check mark goes up so that there is some marking in the upper box as well. A machine would reject that ballot and calling it an overvote, meaning that the voter tried to vote for two candidates. In that case, it's the job of the officers of election to determine by majority what voter intent was. If it is clear that the check mark was in one box and the stray mark was in another box, they would count that vote as for the candidate who had the most of the check mark. Sometimes there are stray marks and they just cannot tell voter intent. Something else that happens is most ballots have barcodes on them. And if a stray mark goes into a barcode, the machine won't read the ballot. So officers of election determine voter intent. In a recounted election a few years ago, a ballot that was originally rejected by officers of election as unclear was reviewed and later adjudicated by the recount court. This new law prohibits that. It says only ballots that were originally counted may be recounted because it was the officer of election job. In addition, except for statewide offices, if a recount results in a tie, there will be a special election. You might remember a couple of years ago that beautiful bowl from the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts into which two names were put, and the State Board of Elections drew one name to determine who would be a delegate. That will not happen anymore. It says except for statewide offices. So my guess is if it is something that the entire state has voted for, I didn't see what they'll do. We'll find out if and when that happens. There are a couple of other bills that I want to talk about. They are not effective now, but they have passed and they will be implemented later on. 3 bills passed this year, subject to being passed again in next year's General Assembly. And if so, they will be effective next July, 2021. The first one would require localities to provide postage for the return of absentee ballots by mail. I think they made that a delayed implementation because localities will have to put a lot more money in their budget for postage for ballots. The second bill would extend voting hours. The polls currently open at 6 a.m. and currently close at 7 p.m. But under this law, they would close at 8 p.m. You know, there's been a lot of talk on both sides around the state about keeping the polls open later. My personal opinion is I like the uniformity of having our closing time be the same as our neighbors. DC and Maryland both close polls at 8 o'clock. I know it makes a lot of people, myself, a lot of my colleagues here on the screen, Dave, officers of election, work a longer day and longer into the night, and happy hours will be delayed by another hour, but it's really a good move to increase voter access. The third bill that would have to pass again next year would move the primary election in June from the schools will be closed by the 3rd Tuesday of June. Finally, one bill passed. It doesn't have to be passed again, but its effective date is not until October 2022, and that is same-day registration. Beginning in November of 2022, voters may register on Election Day. This will require major changes to our registration systems, which is why the General Assembly gave us 2 years to implement it. In a moment, I'm going to turn the floor over to Dave, or Wendy will turn the floor over to Dave. And Dave will talk more about vote by mail. And I told you, watch his eyes light up as he talks about it. He really loves it. And the election landscape in the era of a pandemic. But I would be remiss if I didn't thank the Falls Church League for recording this meeting to make it available for educational purposes, as well as for spreading the invitation very widely. We also thank the League for all the volunteer help it provides to our office during elections. We've had a long and healthy relationship, and I'm one of few people in a unique position to say that both sides really appreciate that relationship. And I will warn you, League folks, we're going to call on you again maybe even as soon as this summer. So finally, I would like to open it to questions. Thank you very much. Let me stop sharing my screen.
So Renee, thank you. There's actually a lot of Q&A back and forth on the chat, and Dave has been working overtime, Matt is typing in answers. But let me just police up a couple at the very beginning that I think are on a lot of people's minds. First of all, would you be willing to make your slides available so we can share them for people who weren't taking notes?
Most definitely. I'll email them to you, Wendy, and then you can disseminate them.
Okay, sort of same type of question is, I think it would be great to capture everything that's in the chat box for people who haven't been monitoring it, so that we don't have to simply repeat all the, verbally all the questions that were asked and answered in the chat box, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, just a couple questions here that I think came early on, besides about availability of the slides. The first one, I think you answered, but perhaps not. Will early votes be counted by election day? I think you said yes, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, what happens if you vote early, which is absentee in person? You can go and see my friend Dave or a couple of other people on this screen. I saw Gail and I saw Margaret. You go into the office, you will be given a ballot, you will insert it into the scanner in the office. That scanner will be tabulated right after the polls close at 7 o'clock on election night.
Okay, great. Next one is the state recommending we vote early to alleviate the load on USPS? I think you said yes, but also to make your life easier, correct?
I don't know. I think, Dave, you might know more about what the state is recommending. Election officials all over the state are recommending that. I don't know if the department itself is. It certainly has information available about voting by mail.
Right, and then there were a couple, and we'll do questions again at the end also. So if I've skipped over one, I'll run back through the chat box again at the end. There were just been a couple other ones about getting an absentee ballot if you don't have a driver's license, and I think that both an absentee ballot or a mail-in ballot if you don't have a driver's license, and I think that you addressed both of those.
You can apply by mail for an absentee ballot. You would download the application, fill it out and send it in, or alternatively, call our office. And when I send you all that stuff, I'll put our office phone number in there and tell us that you want us to mail you an absentee ballot application, and we will mail it to you. And Dave can answer. I know that there are absentee ballot applications on his desk for people who want to come into City Hall. They're on our front counter. You can take one absentee ballot application. You can take some for your friends too, and then they would fill them out and send them in. And I see Tom Devlin just asked if the early or mailed-in ballots will be counted once the polls close.
So somebody votes, early and mail in the ballot, is it correct?
I think Tom Devlin just asked, will absentee ballots be counted before the polls close? Absentee ballots they can be scanned, but we can't print the results tape from that scanner until after the polls close. We may start processing them days or even weeks ahead of time, but we can't tabulate them until after the polls close.
Okay. So I think Renee, it's a great stopping point, and we're like 35 minutes in. So let's turn it over to Dave, and then I don't know. I'm going to see if he's still as adept at typing all these answers while he's actually talking. So we might We might need a little more time for questions at the end, but Dave, take it away. Thank you.
Sure, no problem. Thanks for having me. Appreciate being here. Wish, like Renee said, wish we could all do this in person. It certainly makes the Q&A sessions a lot easier, but we are in certainly unprecedented times. The General Assembly has chosen to make a few election law changes that happened just before presidential, and we got a pandemic on top of it. So it's important to get all of this information out to you, and so that you can disseminate all of this information out to the groups that you are working with, especially in our community. So I very much appreciate being able to speak to you about this. I do love vote by mail. I'm not sure the Virginia model as it is now is quite what I'm talking about. If you know other states that vote by mail and have really voter-centric voting methods, the Colorado model is what you should look at. So it's an ability for the election offices to send ballots to every registered voter. And it increases turnout, and it also keeps our rolls cleaner than any other system. So that's what I'm really looking forward to with the vote by mail, the vote at home legislation that gets through the General Assembly. We are a step closer to that. Getting rid of the reasons for voting by mail or voting early in general is a real step forward there. And because of the pandemic and we don't know yet how November is going to look, we know voters are very interested in voting by mail. How do we know this? Go back 4 years ago, 2016, it was a presidential election year. September 23rd was the first day that I could mail ballots, when the ballots were ready and we could mail them. So September 23rd was about 46 days before Election Day. And I mailed 18 ballots in the city of Falls Church. Fast forward to today, we're not in September yet. It's the end of July. I still have a few more days, over a month before we get to September. And I already have over 700 applications. Woo. So we've gone from 18, and we're gonna be in the thousands by the time our first mail out goes. So Virginians are demanding by mail ballots for the pandemic. We also saw it in the recent primary. It was a Republican primary in the city of Falls Church. So the turnout was 2.6%, but most of those ballots were requested as by mail ballots. Now, this is the problem though, because we ended up having more people vote in person than casting their ballots by mail. So there's another step that voters need to take once they get their ballot, and that's get it back to us. It doesn't count unless it's cast. And that needs to be emphasized. Vote by mail states seem to have this pretty well nailed down. They get most of their ballots cast and to keep their rolls pretty clean. But states that are not used to voting by mail, and Virginia is one of them, there needs to be reminders to voters to get their ballot back to us. It's not enough just to accept it. We're not going to count it unless it gets cast. Some of the things that you should know about vote by mail: you can always bring your ballot to our office. It's the most direct way to make sure it's going to be counted. You just bring it to our office, and we will check it in, and it'll be in our lockbox so the election officers can go through it and make sure it's cast. There's been a lot of talk about drop boxes. We don't know yet if we can have them. The law is murky on the subject, and we may need an attorney general's opinion before we are allowed to put up a drop box. Part of the reason for that is the law says that the ballot must be dropped off personally. What is personally? It does not tell me to check your ID when you are dropping off your ballot, but I do have a mailbox. Can you put it in the mailbox? So that's a question we are still asking. And when we finally do get an answer for that, we will certainly let it be known how that's going to work. And we will have a drop box installed so that you can drop off those ballots if and when that occurs. You should also know that while we give the United States Postal Service a lot of criticism for not delivering mail, I have been working with the United States Postal Service, and they are doing a great job when it comes to ballots. They actually add 3 things to every ballot to make sure it gets delivered. One of those things is a intelligent barcode. So when we print your address on the outside of the ballot, on the envelope that gets delivered to you, there's a barcode on it, and the USPS can actually track that. You can actually track that. We have a tool, we call it Ballot Scout. It's just like UPS, USPS, you just put that code into the Ballot Scout webpage and it'll show you where it was last scanned. But you can always call my office and see where it is. I have certainly helped voters find their ballot on their desks. We've also helped voters realize that they have not quite completed the application. So we can help them finish the application and then mail out that ballot to them. So the intelligent mail barcode is one very significant piece for helping ballots get both to the voter and then back to our office. It's also on the return address. The second thing is that there is an election mail insignia, and this will be put on your ballots. It's like a stamp. It's in the middle of it. It looks very patriotic, but it only goes on election mail. And so that insignia helps postal workers know that this is an important piece of mail that needs to get either to the voter or back to our office. And third, they have a green tag. So in every batch of ballots that we send out on any particular day, we put a green tag on top of it. When they see the green tag, they know that that group of ballots needs to be given priority. So there are 3 significant steps that the USPS has taken to really help deliver the mail. We are very happy with how that has worked. And they also have given election officials a website in order to log anytime there are problems with ballots in the mail so that they can work and figure out where the problem is. So vote by mail is an incredibly important subject that we are discussing currently. And because of this, we have adopted the rhetoric of the flatten the curve for the COVID. We would really appreciate not getting most of Falls Church applying for by mail ballots in mid-October. That would really crush our office. So instead, the sooner you can get that into us, the better. And on top of that, if you have a Virginia DMV ID, like a driver's license, it would be even better if you applied for it at the Virginia Department of Elections Citizen Portal. Because if it comes in online, the process for us in the office is very simple, and it lines you up and it'll get your ballot out on the first mailing. I have the link in the chat group so that you can go check that. If you've already applied for your absentee by mail ballot, you can go back to that link, check your voter record, and see if it has been accepted. I have had voters email and call me to make sure it's that we have received the application, and that's fine. You can certainly do that. Have that peace of mind. But it is available to you on your voter record at the Virginia Department of Elections website, so you can check that. Not being a vote by mail state, we do not yet have a process for just telling you we have accepted your by mail ballot. Usually that acceptance is in the form of a ballot by the time it's mailed to you. But as I've said, more people have been applying earlier than ever to make sure their by-mail ballot application is into us. We do have plenty of paper forms. Also, I would like you to know that while this is not a Virginia Department of Elections website, I believe the website is eabsentee.org. eabsentee.org was built by some citizens of Virginia who were very interested in having the ability to email an application to a voter registration office. It's a digital signature tool. So as long as it acknowledges that the signature is digital, we can accept it. It has to acknowledge that, and that's why the eabsentee.org tool is good. So we can accept, an application that came strictly online, and it goes to our email without you having to print it and then sign it yourself. But if you do print it and you do sign it, you can just take a picture of it and email it to us at vote@fallschurchva.gov. We check that every day. We process everything that comes in there. So it can be submitted via email. You can scan it and email it to us. We even still take faxes. We have received a couple of fax applications still. So our fax machine is working, and we can accept absentee applications many, many different ways. Voter registration applications, we cannot. We do need a signature, a wet signature on that. So it must be mailed to us if it is not done online with your Virginia DMV ID. When it comes to absentee voting, we are trying to flatten the curve, get those absentee applications to us as soon as possible so we can process them if you plan on voting by mail. Voting in person, also an interesting thing for us to get a handle on during a pandemic. We are obviously going to be open for in-person voting. During the primary, we primarily did curbside voting. So if a voter came to our office, they'd call our office and we would come out to them with everything that they needed so that they could stay in their car. We would give them their ballot, and then they would give us back the ballot in a privacy folder so that it could be taken back into the office and cast. So that was during the primary. I'm not sure we're going to do that for the general election. We will likely have the voters come into our office. It should be a very quick process. The City Hall, you do need to wear a mask. We request that you bring your own pens. However, we do have pens, and currently we have plenty, so they can be single-use pens and you can take it with you. We also have single-use folders so that when we give you a ballot, we give it to you with a folder, and then you cast it, and then you can throw that folder away. And then we have also been trained. We've gone through OSHA training on all the cleaning supplies that we are now using all throughout the office and throughout City Hall. So we have to know and be educated on all the cleaning supplies and when to use those things to keep everybody safe during this pandemic. With the in-person.
Dave, I don't want to interrupt. I just want to ask participants because we have some asynchronous Q&A going on in the chat box. We have a lot of experts out there who are also answering questions. Can I just ask that for now, for the balance, that people just type questions and then I'll police all of them up at the end, because answers are coming in from 2 and 3 questions ago and it's getting a little bit confusing. Please keep going, Dave.
Understood. I wish I had been better at looking at both the questions and the chat box, doing double duty as they were coming in.
You fell down on the job.
based on, while we're talking about the chat box, I would like to say the registration deadline will be October 13th. And I think that's because there's a holiday involved in there. So get those registrations in. Falls Church doesn't really have a problem with that. We are a very highly registered city, and the 18-year-olds and the 17-year-olds who are going to be 18 by the general election have been registering at high rates. It's been very, very interesting to watch. Ever since 2017, every election, and this has an asterisk, every election has been a turnout 10% higher than the 4 years before it. And the asterisk is except for Republican-only primaries. So we have had 2 Republican-only primaries, and both of them were under 3% turnout. But for every other election since 2017, it's been a 10% bump, which means that for the presidential election, we normally have about 85% turnout. We are planning for 95% turnout.
Woo! What was his number? 95.
That's our plan. That's what we're actually gonna print.
Well, they're always high, but
We're actually gonna print 105% of the population. Now I know that sounds bad, but keep in mind that people will need to spoil their ballots because they've made mistakes or they have lost their by-mail ballot. And so we still need to have plenty of ballots for people who lose or make mistakes. So I know it sounds like we're printing more ballots than is actually registered voters in the city, but we need to make sure we have enough ballots for every voter who wants to cast a ballot the way they want to cast that ballot. And I think, unless, I think this is a good time for the Q&A for whatever we brought up.
Okay, thank you. So let me go back through. I think the first one that came up was about a witness and the role of a witness in getting a mail-in ballot. Can you speak to that?
Sure. Current Virginia law requires a witness. The witness can literally be anybody in the world. It does not have to be a citizen, does not have to be 18 years of age. Anybody in the world that is not you can sign the witness section. The reason this is a question is because there was a pandemic, and in the last primary, Virginia was able to allow voters to not need a witness signature. It was a judge declaration just for the primary. As of right now, and this may change, things are fluid, but as of right now, a signature is still necessary for the presidential election, a witness signature. So you need your signature and you need a witness signature.
And if I could add something to that, just about the witness requirement in general. You hear about some states where they say, well, we can't accept your ballot because your signature doesn't match the signature that we have on file for you. Virginia does not do signature matching, which is why we have the witness requirement. Because we're not verifying your signature, nobody in Virginia has been trained to match signatures. Now that could change in the future too, but not in time for this year. But that is the reason. That way somebody has looked at the voter, somebody who knows the voter, has looked at the voter and watched them sign that envelope. That's why the witness requirement is there.
So Renee and Dave, what are you recommending for people who are over 60 or whatever is considered now? I've even lost track of what is considered a vulnerable age, who live alone, who do not want to have social contact. What is the best practice for managing that situation?
Sure, I can understand that. When it comes to high-risk populations, it's really up to whatever the voter feels is safest. If it's by mail, if it's during the early voting period, if you are 45 days before the election, You're not going to have a ton of people voting yet, at least if past presidents is any bellwether. We're in unprecedented times. It could be most of Falls Church votes that 46th day. I could have everybody show up and be like, let's just get this ballot, now. And I can understand that sentiment.
Yes.
An Erev Rosh Hashanah, no less.
and speaking of that, there are lines that can be issues. And if we're talking about early voting, I'm not going to worry too much about the lines because there is still plenty of time to get your ballot in. If I end up having most of Falls Church on that Friday. But your question is, I would say vote by mail for high-risk populations if they really don't want to go out in public, and hopefully they will be able to find a way to get that witness signature without exposing themselves to much risk.
I'm just wondering if there isn't some role that the league could play in terms of offering people advice around that. Since I think just even looking at our own, the population of our own league, I think there's any number of people who fall into that category. I think we have to get together with the board and figure out what might we be able to do to help people out who are in that situation. The next one, if you bring your unopened ballot to the election folks, I think that means you, will they serve as a witness and ensure that you filled it out correctly?
Yes.
Okay. Then I believe this was referring to what the Postal Service is doing. Are the post office ID methods on mail nationwide or just in Virginia?
The USPS allows it nationwide. Whether or not localities nationwide are also doing these methods is another question, and I couldn't answer that. I know not every locality in the US is putting on the election mail insignia, is doing intelligent mail barcodes, or possibly even the green tags. But those are things that Virginia is doing.
Okay, so that answers, that answers the next question, which is this just Falls Church or is it Virginia? It's the state.
And I will say that not every locality in Virginia is even doing the intelligent mail barcode, unfortunately. But Falls Church is.
Somebody else asked, what do you say when people talk about fraud connected with mail-in ballots?
It is very rare. I guess I will expand on that. Fraud when it comes to elections is extremely rare, and most of the times that it has been questioned, it has actually been accidental, or it has been memory related, such as dementia. Somebody who just plumb forgot they're already getting treatment for their mental issue. So the times that it's happened, and when it comes to studies on fraud, when it comes to voter fraud specifically, whether it's in person at the polls or by mail, you will see that it is slightly, of how rare it is, there's slightly more of it by mail than there is in person. But it's still so very rare that it's not an issue. And in fact, more of the election crimes that you'll find actually have to do with candidates and parties. Those are the type of election crimes, and sometimes they get the misnomer of voter fraud, but it's not voter fraud, it's fraud on voters, because it's actually just election crimes coming from candidates or their parties or committees.
So Dave, if people wanted statistics or they wanted to delve deeper into that, what resource would you point them to for the research behind the experience with fraud and mail-in voting?
Sure, there's quite a lot of that out there. Brennan Center is a great resource for looking at a lot of this stuff. And I know the Washington Post has also done roundups of the research. So you can probably just Google, Washington Post, Brennan Center, and, election fraud, and you will get the information you're looking for. They point it that way. Certainly colleges are always doing research and looking at it. And then another resource that is good to look towards is a guy named Rick Hasen. He usually does a lot of election law research and a lot of it does come down on what kind of fraud there is out there.
Thank you. So there's, I think this might have been answered, but I'm not sure. Is there still an issue with voter registration through DMV? At one point, the applications were not being forwarded in a timely manner.
I would like to very much say that has been fixed, that has been repaired. That is a very nice way that we get our applications now, especially during the pandemic. Once the DMV's closed, wow, our registration rates went down. So it's good that the DMV is opening up again. And now our registrations are, change of addresses are going up again in the office. But they have an electronic tool that pretty much sends them right to our online hopper and gets the person registered by the next day. So that has been really a great tool to go from the DMV to our office all electronically, and it's completely reduced our provisional ballots on election day.
This is two rolled together, and I think that the first one you probably answered. I assume my wife can witness for me and I can witness for her. The second one is, will people get notified if they have made a mistake on their mail-in ballot?
That's a more complicated question. Certainly early enough in the process, we should have the ability to reach out if there is a problem with your ballot for any reason, so that we can say, hey, you still have time to correct this. But when you get into the last 3 weeks before the election, we are going to be absolutely crushed with work between early voting, absentee voting, and the last bit of registrations that even though the deadline has passed, we will still be getting the ones that hit the postmark from all over the state. So we will do our best. But make sure you get it filled out early and sent in early so that you know that your ballot has been cast.
And then I think you also alluded to this, but when you talked about having people serve as working in the polls as registrars, helping the registration office, what are the plans for keeping the poll workers safe?
Great question, and we had a good trial run through the primary with lots of PPE, both sent from the state and from Falls Church. Just everybody coming together and giving us the tools that we needed. We had face masks, we have face shields, we have gloves for those who would like them. Actually, the gloves came in very handy for just paper ballot counting. So it reduced paper cuts, which is a nice benefit to all this PPE. But we've had plenty of supplies to help out, and we think it went really well. But that said, we wouldn't mind a reduction of risk to our election officers. So the more people that either vote early or vote by mail, the better. Right.
Just somebody asked if we were going to be distributing the information that was the questions that were answered inside the chat box, and the answer is yes. Those links and those references we will be providing along with the slides. It's just there's going to have to be a little cleanup because some of the comments back and forth were more administrative and more process oriented. So, before I ask both speakers for some closing remarks, for those who dialed in late, if you're online and you're not a member of the League of Women Voters of Falls Church, would you be so kind as to just type your name and contact information into the chat box so we can keep track of who's attending our events, and so that we can stay in touch with you and keep you informed when there's future programs on this same topic. And so, Renee, I'd like to start with you and then go over to David and just any closing comments that you'd like to make.
I actually think that we've covered a whole lot of ground. We are always looking for officers of election. This year, it may be different. We may need some people to help out in the office in the weeks leading up to the election, either pre-processing absentee ballots as they come in, or helping to mail out those last absentee ballots once we have requests. So if you're at all interested in that, please let us know. We will need officers of election on election day. A lot of people don't want to work in a polling place because they don't want to have people contact. We will try to make it as safe as possible for the possibly up to 8,000 absentee ballots that we'll be receiving by mail to be counted. What I envision us doing, and it'll be over a period of days, is, we'll have teams of 2 people that will examine the envelopes to accept and reject them, making sure that everything is as it needs to be. And those people will be wearing masks and face shields and gloves, and they can sit 6 feet apart, and one person will make a pile, says, these are my accepts and these are my rejects, and then push them over to the second person 6 feet away who will do the same thing. So that process, we hope, will be as safe as an indoor process can be. It's required that to be inside City Hall, you wear a mask. So we are expecting that to be the procedure. So anybody who wants to help out with the election, please let us know. Thanks.
Thank you, Renee.
I would like to note that because of the unprecedents of vote by mail nationwide, that everybody needs to be prepared that we may not know the results of the election on November 3rd. It may take us to November 6th before most of those by mail applications get processed and we have a decision on that topic. So a preparation for that. Another thing that I would like to hope that you will hear and spread the word. The state has considered mailing all voters voter absentee applications, and I think they've decided against it. You may have heard that Maryland has decided to do it. We know in the primary there were candidates that decided to mail everybody an absentee application. While we are not against giving voters the ability to apply by mail, it would be really great if most of them could do it online and not fill out the paper form. The paper form is very process heavy for our offices. So if you know of any candidates or parties or anybody who's going to do a mass outing, have them lead with the online information, because if anybody has a Virginia DMV ID, they can easily do it online at the citizens portal, rather than filling out that piece of paper, mailing it to us, and then having that process go. So that would just be a great help really to all offices of election.
Great. Well, we're now just about an hour and 10 minutes, and it has been so helpful and factual and practical, as well as giving us some insight into the sort of larger policy context that this is taking place in, as well as some of the challenges that have yet to be resolved. I think everybody's going to walk away understanding the importance of doing this early, so that you guys don't get swamped at the end. It's the last thing we want. Renee's my neighbor. I have to see her when we take out the trash, so I don't want her mad at me. So I'm certainly going to do it. But anyway, on behalf of the local league and my colleagues on the league who made this happen today, thank you so much to both of you. And we'll be making sure that people get the PowerPoint slides and the cleaned up chat box And we hope to see you all at our next virtual event. In the meantime, be safe and stay healthy, everybody.